laminate in beds. Conventionally, sedimentary, here, this is where it gets good. Conventionally, sedimentary laminae in beds are assumed to represent longer seasonal variations or annual changes, as these layers accumulated very slowly. Mount St. Helens teaches us that the stratified layers commonly characterizing geological formations can form very rapidly by flow processes. Such features have been formed quickly underwater in laboratory sedimentation tanks, and it should not surprise us to see that they have formed in a natural catastrophe. So those people, the experts against all this, they can cry and moan as much as they want, but there's nothing that replaces the empirical experience of seeing this. Steve Austin has a video about this, about the Mount St. Helens and the Grand Canyon, and you can go there yourself and see it. It's not like it's very different than when the professionals and experts ask us to just believe that something happened millions of years ago and over the process of millions of years. So you can't go and see that. You just have to trust them. Whereas this, you can go and see it. So the difference between how Steve Austin's findings here are scientific and what the experts saying are just pseudoscience and wild philosophy is just a staggering difference between the two. One being pure science and the other being propaganda. And probably a lot of the people, the opponents of this view, old earthers and academia and so forth, what they do standardly is just find some little thing and don't argue the point, don't have any evidence to back it up, and say, I have people literally email me and say, I've chosen to ignore all of your work because of this one little thing over here. And then when I find out their little problem, it's a total straw man argument, or it doesn't even make any sense, or it's just the disagreeing about how I use a word or some philosophical concept, which has nothing to do with the overall picture. So that's certainly what the opponents of this talk here today will say, and this is probably where they will attack. And what they'll do is simply say, oh, the Earth is very old. Obviously, the radioisotope dating methods show this. And they may even say something like, hey, who cares if it contradicts? They all you can date the same rock to be wildly different dates. And that may be interesting for them to say that, but it doesn't matter. It's the dating methods are in huge need of somebody to explain why they don't work and give proper consistent dating. And more importantly, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is the empirical experience of being able to firsthand see what happens at St. Helens. Nothing replaces that. Any other concept you want to bring up that, these dates, according to this concept of this radioisotopic dating and half-lives and everything, all those concepts, in which are largely imbued with philosophy, don't stand up in any way to the empirical data of St. Helens. Here's another real terse page. Got a nice picture of the stratification layers, the Mount St. Helens regions, right on the side of a rock. Wow, I'm going to make that the cover of the YouTube channel videos. And it says here they've got a couple. The site is creationism.org/articles/nelson1.htm. And point 4 here, layered strata formed in 3 hours. On June 12, 1980, a third explosive eruption produced 25 feet of stratification that amazed geologists. Successive layers are traditionally thought to require long periods of time to form, yet upwards of 100 layers accumulated mostly between the nighttime hours of 9 and 12, while a plume swiftly ascended 9 miles above the mountain. So what are we left with here exactly? Now remember, we got to that point where we said, okay, the empirical account of the world is a bunch of code-bearing species, creatures in these species, who reproduce with one another to replicate their codes, and the codes and of the species, dictate the form and structure of the creatures, and they have all kinds of similarities and repeats from creature to creature, where whole patterns will repeat from creature to creature. Doesn't matter if it's chimps to humans or deer to horses or spiders to humans. There's spider DNA in human non-coding DNA. the so-called junk DNA. Okay, so this is very standard, mainstream, uncontroversial issue that these patterns from one creature to the next show up in various, doesn't matter if it's in the non-coding or the coding, that the repeating patterns show up, just rearranged and in order to create the proper morphology. So what we have then is, if we look at the empirical world, this is what we see. Okay, this is the empirical account. Now we have to, to add something, if we want the evolutionist account, we have to add a philosophy. We have to say, okay, this is all very, very old. And over a huge long period of time, all the different code carrying species changed into each other to create all the diverse numbers and amounts of creatures you see populating the world. Okay, and as we said, it's not observable. Nobody has ever seen it happen. It's completely a philosophy. It's not an empirical. It's never been observed, so it's not scientific. So we said, well, maybe there's some evidence for it. However, if the fossil record can predict or demonstrate that back in time there was just single-celled, simple creatures, and then they got more and more complex through time, and bam, here we are, then we'd have to contend with that. I said that's actually not evidence to refute, to support evolution anyways. It would just show that creatures were put here one after the other. Still doesn't show that the creatures are turning into each other. But we don't even have that now, okay? Because we've just shown with the empirical data of Mount St. Helens that if you want to be scientific and follow the best empirical account, you have to reject the wild philosophy of the creature codes turning into each other. Species codes turning into each other. Because we have an empirical account of the strata, the petrified forest, and so forth, all forming within a few weeks, and we do not have an empirical account of the theory of them forming over millions of years. You know how they say the river goes through the Grand Canyon, and like Steve Austin was just saying. So you have to throw, if you want to be empirical and want to be scientific, from what is known as of today, 14th of May 2010, to this point in our knowledge and the ordinary human thinking, you must throw away the idea of an old Earth with a progression through the strata. So then all you have left is that humans are the code carrying, and the species of the world are the code carrying creatures, reproducing in one another and don't change into one another. You simply have zero evidence that that's what's going on. Do you see how simple, obvious, profound this is? It's really just a different way of thinking. We're so imbued with this, there must have been this old Earth, and the creatures all turned into one another. We're so imbued with this, nobody's ever seen it happen. Nobody's ever demonstrated it to happen in nature. I don't know if anybody's created a different species in a natural selection scenario in the lab. It doesn't even matter if they did, because natural selection is not what's running evolution. It's punctuated equilibrium. The academic just never ceases to amaze me how the academics just ignore that conflict. Outrightly ignore it. Huge issue. But anyway, so the most empirical account by light years is the one that I just said, where we have a world of species with these reproduced codes, and where the creatures in the species reproduce and only have mild variations between creature to creature. Nothing anywhere resembling anything like a species change. Now, what does this mean for chromosome 2 fusion? That's as simple. Probably most of you already know exactly what I'm going to say. Chromosome 2 fusion is nothing significant at all. It's just another variation in the DNA. It's just another different arrangement of the pieces and patterns and patternings of the DNA codes that the creatures all share. It's been made a big deal. We'll see what the evolutionists have done, is said, oh my goodness, if humans had a common ancestor, the co-ancestor with chimpanzees, And we have one less chromosome. We had to have evolved at some point where the chromosome fused, two chromosomes fused, so we have one less in the pair, so one less pair. But see, that's progression thinking. But we just saw that we have to reject progression for the strict empirical scientific grounds. We can't have all this philosophy if we want to scientifically understand our world. So we have to replace that evolutionist progressionist explanation with something like, okay, we have chimpanzees and human DNA,